and extend a warm welcome to all of you. Thanks so much for joining our session this morning. And I'll pass on to Katie King, who's author and CEO of AI in Business, to talk us through the structure for today.
Thank you very much, Angela. So welcome to all of you. There are still people joining now, but lots of you have made time to be on time, so don't want to keep you waiting too long. So as Angela said, I'm Katie King. I wrote a book on the impact of artificial intelligence on business, and I'll be sharing with you in my section some nuggets of wisdom about that. But we have an amazing panel with you. We've got about an hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes. We'll see how we get on, but we won't keep you any later than about 11:15. The idea is that each of the presenters will be presenting to you for around 7 or 8 minutes. So keep it nice and short. We know how intense it can be to be on Zoom and to be hearing people, for 30, 40 minutes. So we'll keep everybody to about 7 minutes, some with slides, some just presenting, without that kind of visual backup. We have 5 presenters, including myself. And so what we'll do is we will record this webinar. And at the end of the 5 presentations, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. And depending on how many of you there are, there's quite a lot of you. There's potentially up to 50. I mean, we had about 100 register, but I'm sure there's going to be more like 50 or 60. Because there's so many, we'll probably get you to put your questions into the chat, or else it could be a bit sort of tricky with everybody being on video. So there'll be a chance to ask questions. We'll record it. You can get a copy of the recording afterwards. We won't record the Q&A, so you're able to feel very comfortable asking questions. They can be anonymous. And it's an opportunity to ask this panelist any questions that you might have. But really what we're looking at here is the future of work, how we prepare, how we support our staff. It's about well-being for all generations. There's multi-generations in the workplace. So we'll be covering some really, really interesting hot topics. I'll be looking at it from a tech point of view, and Ruth and Angela and the team will be looking at all different angles. So there's no repetition. There's just an opportunity to hear from 5 excellent speakers. So let's get started. And the first presenter this morning is Ruth Stefansdottir. That's an Icelandic name. I had to ask her this morning. So huge welcome to Ruth. And she is head of human resources at Charterhouse Accountants. So Ruth is going to spend the next 7 minutes sharing with us her expertise and some of her nuggets of wisdom. So we look forward to hearing from you, Ruth. Over to you.
Thank you, Katie. So what I will be talking about today is a case study of how Charterhouse benefited from putting in place a health and well-being strategy. So what I would like you to take away from today is the importance of gathering quantitative and qualitative data and analyzing it, having regular informal conversations between managers and employees, as well as HR and managers, and lastly, to take action based on data trends. So let me tell you a little bit about how these actions help Charterhouse. Following on from a data analysis exercise I ran for the period of May 2018 to 2019, I saw a trend in high sickness, high employee turnover, and low awareness to mental health. During this time, we had sickness absence of an average of 6.7 days per employee, and employee turnover was 29%. So this was obviously a call for action. And having gone through a personal development journey myself over the past few years, I wanted to consider if I could use my personal experience to benefit the firm. And through my journey, I understood the importance of exercise, sleep, and nutrition on both my mental and physical well-being. So some of the things that I benefited from was getting support from a counselor and a nutritionist, as well as having seen the impact of meditating, doing yoga, and just being outside in nature. But of course, there's no one fits all. So we all need to figure out what is it that suits us. So how did I use my personal experience to tackle the firm's problem? Following my reflection, on my experience and put together a health and well-being strategy, which included a calendar with focus on different areas for improved well-being and motivational challenges related to each topic. The strategy focused on overall well-being with the aim to raise awareness to mental health, to decrease sickness absence and employee turnover, as well as to increase engagement and therefore ultimately productivity. So this was quite a big project, and I knew that the rollout and engagement would play a very big part in it. I considered which internal expertise I could use and whether I would benefit more from getting external support. So I was put in contact with Angela Steele from Super Wellness, and following our discussion, she put together a program for us, which were based on the topics I wanted to focus on. The topics were varied and covered both mental and physical well-being, and were all based around nutrition as the foundation. We covered one topic each month in a 90-minute session, which was then followed by a 30-minute session, a progress session 2 weeks later. So the topics we covered were exercise and goal setting, stress buster, sleep, food for the mind, and immune booster. It was a very interactive program, and we ran challenges related to each topic for more engagement. And it turned out really well for us, and we had 70% participation from the company, which is really good. But in regards to other aspects of the strategy, when we were analyzing the data, we saw that we have all these benefits and policies in place to support the employees, but they were not using it. So we launched a campaign to reintroduce and raise awareness to our benefits and initiatives we have in place in the company. We put special emphasis on mental well-being and work-life balance. So for mental well-being, we have face-to-face or virtual counseling sessions and employee assistance program. But then we raised awareness to flexible working options and toil, encouraging employees not to work outside their office hours. So if they're on holiday, they're on holiday, as well as the importance of actually taking holidays. And getting this through was very important to get managers and senior managers leading by example. And this is probably even more important now during COVID, when everybody's working from home, close to their computer all the time, and nobody wants to go on holiday because they can't go anywhere. But we do all need a break. And lastly, the last component of the strategy was to educate managers about the importance of containing anxiety, keeping boundaries, and touching base with their employees. So what benefits have we seen? So in comparison with the data I shared with you earlier, from May 19 to 2020, we have seen a significant improvement compared to last year. Sickness absence has decreased by 2.8% and was then 4.8 days per employee for 12 months. Employee turnover went from 29% to 17%, and employee engagement was at 83%, which is an increase of 4.2%. So we run data analysis every 6 months, and we're just in the process of doing the engagement survey now. So I don't have complete comparison data, but from May, employee sickness has gone down to 2 days per employee. And for the last year, employee turnover has been 7%. It would be very interesting to see the actual comparison numbers in May next year, but this is at least a positive move in the right direction. But how did COVID impact the way we support our employees' health and well-being? So in the midst of rolling out the strategy, and especially Super Wellness, COVID came. And luckily we were able to work with that, and we put everything virtually. So we worked with Super Wellness on that. And I really believe this was instrumental in building the resilience in our employees and coming out stronger. We also ensured employees had the right equipment to be able to work from home. And we put more emphasis on managers speaking to their employees, touching base with them on a daily basis, especially virtually if possible, as well as a management team to communicate. So, in conclusion, if you are facing same or similar challenges as Charterhouse, what I suggest you do is to start looking at your data and analyzing it, to have regular communication with your employees, and to take action based on your findings. Thank you very much, and I will hand back to Katie now.
Thank you, Ruth. That's a really interesting case study. I'm an employer, but also a mum, and I know of young people 21 and 24. And just for myself as well, so I know how important that those points that you made, food, communication, sleep, it's really, really essential. And we're going into lockdown 2, and it's going to be even more important this second time around. So thank you for sharing. Really important to see those statistics and to have that data to back up what historically has been seen as a softer area, and I think it's really coming to the fore now. So really pleased to see those statistics that back up the scientific evidence for that. And now I'm going to hand over to Angela Steele from Super Wellness. She is the founder and CEO, and she will be no doubt adding a lot to that case study that Ruth just shared with us there. And Angela is the host of this morning's webinar. For those of you who have just joined a few minutes later, we've got 5 excellent speakers for you this morning, all speaking for around 7 or 8 minutes. And then at the end, you'll have an opportunity to ask us questions. So look forward to speaking to some of you at the end there. So over to you, Angela. We look forward to hearing from you now. Thank you.
I'll start by sharing my screen and my slides. There we go. Hi everyone. So today what I want to do is share some of our learnings based on the
Angela, you might want to put that into slideshow mode.
Is it not in?
There we go. No, there we go. That's all right.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
This is my notes. Hi everyone. So what I want to do today, is share some of our experiences really over the past 6 years and how those can apply to help companies survive and thrive post-COVID. So what are some of the key challenges that employers are talking about at the moment? I think top of the list is really mental and physical health risks. I think everyone's struggling with, working from home, struggling with setting boundaries and applying those healthy lifestyle habits. And that's closely linked to burnout. So we're hearing a lot about burnout, and another word that keeps coming up is anxiety. So of course, with mental and physical health, there's a lot of aspects that we can't control, but then there's also the aspects and the health risks that we can control. So I'll come to that. And then the second challenge that people are talking about is really this challenge of how do you maintain connection when everyone's working remotely? How can you maintain that sense of belonging and culture? And there's definitely a sense that that's being eroded at the moment. And thirdly, it's, how do you engage people when people are getting so many emails, back-to-back Zoom meetings, yet another webinar? How do you engage people in your wellbeing program without adding to that noise and competing with everything else? So earlier in the pandemic, Accenture were quoted as saying that post-COVID, every business will be a health business. And that really reminds me of a quote a few years ago, which was, every business will become a technology business. And the fact that in order to survive, in order to compete, companies had to embrace technology and technology transformation. And I really think we're at a similar juncture at the moment with wellbeing, and that actually it's wellbeing transformation that's needed, and that the companies that embrace that will be the companies that survive and thrive post-COVID. So I just want to share 3 of the key success factors that we've certainly identified, and I think Ruth's presentation really showed how Charterhouse have put that in place and how they've really made progress through the challenges this year. So the key success factors that I see, number 1 would be resilience. And I think people often think about resilience in the mental health sense, building resilience to stress. But I think the employers that consider the wider health resilience piece will really benefit. So we know, for example, that BMI over 30 really increases our risk of COVID complications. We've heard a lot about vitamin D deficiency and how that impacts our immune health. And we know that sleep can undermine all other areas of health resilience. So I think it's really important to look at these 4 areas really in terms of building resilience within employees and within the wider organisation. And then my second key success factor would be connection. And I know a lot of employers have been putting in place things to try and foster that connection, coffee mornings, Zoom quizzes, but there's something missing. People attend the first ones and then it seems to drop off. And I think the thing that's missing there is that sense of shared purpose. And with health being top of mind for so many people, I think there's really an opportunity to have a shared purpose that colleagues can get behind and work together towards. And a tool that's really effective for that is group coaching, where you give people the opportunity to share their successes, but also the things, and most importantly, the things that they might be struggling with as well. And then healthy competition, we've always found that's a really effective tool for creating connection, particularly, in a very practical sense. If you offer prizes, it can really inject a sense of fun and create buzz that can foster that connection. And so my third point is engagement. And, we often hear that the people who need well-being the most are the toughest to engage. So how do you overcome that? Well, I think there's no silver bullet for it, but I would say that certainly to get closer to that, I would recommend a drip feed of content throughout the year, and to really offer a range of different topics that people will have an opportunity to engage with, as and when it resonates with them. So I think it's really important to move away from perhaps a model where, we have a single event during the year or a wellbeing week, to more of a drip feed and perhaps a calendar of events throughout the year. And then finally, I would say that behaviour change is really important. We don't tend to watch a webinar and then go and change our lifestyle afterwards. So I think it's really a good angle to think about building in some behaviour change into a wellbeing programme, and to support people through that process of then, taking that information and implementing change step by step.
Fantastic. Thank you, Angela. As someone who's
forward my next slide. Oh, there we go.
Oh, sorry.
To say, I hope that's been helpful, and really to get in touch if there's anything I can help with in future. Brilliant.
That was really good. As someone whose weight fluctuates dramatically and who comfort eats as soon as there's a problem, that really resonates with me. But also, as I said, as an employer, as a mum, that shared purpose, that why factor, I'll be addressing that a little bit as well from a technology point of view. So fantastic. Well done, Angela. Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Rob Rayner, who is the Scientific Director for the Centre for Evidence-Based Management and also Professor of Organisational Psychology at Queen Mary University of London. So fantastic to have you here this morning, Rob. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Katie. Good to meet everyone here and the other speakers as well. I just wanted to say a little bit about, to start off, about my interest in work and well-being and productivity. And in preparing for this, I realised they've actually had an interest in well-being at work and its impact on performance actually for almost 40 years, which was quite a shock. And I first got interested in this around the work of Hans Selye, which someone you'll probably remember, who came up with all these ideas that turn out not to be very sound about stress and its effect on the body and so forth. So I've been interested in a long time. And I'm saying that, I guess, not to claim expertise, but to kind of explain I'm very interested in this. I've been for a long time. I think there's been a lot of talk about the future of work. And of course, what's interesting is the future of work is a lot like the past of work in some respects, in that if you don't have to go back very far before the Industrial Revolution, when many of us were actually working at home or very near to home. And the idea we go into factories and offices to work is, in terms of our history and the history of work, actually relatively new. So although it feels strange, I think, for many of us to be working at home, it's a thing we've done, for centuries. So it's, in a sense, it's not a new thing. It's not a future. It's actually kind of going back to the past in a way. And I think that's kind of important, because I think often people act with great shock and surprise at changes in the workplace, as though they're unprecedented and amazing and stunning and awesome and devastating and etc. Yes, sure, sometimes they are, but actually often we've been doing this stuff for a long time. So I guess that's the first thing. The second thing I think that really interests me is the historical links between work and well-being and how that's been thought of. So, I guess in the very earliest days of work or heavily organised work, there wasn't much interest at all, particularly in people's well-being. I think in around the 1900s, certainly staying in the UK and lots of places in Europe and America, you got an interesting thing, the idea of nervous tension or fatigue. The idea that work can just cause this idea of nervous tension, which we don't really use now, but also can make people feel very tired. And a couple of you already mentioned kind of being on endless Zoom calls. And I think that's one effect we're seeing, a kind of sense of fatigue from doing this. But that was around 1900s. And in the 1940s, I think then people got more interested in the idea of the design of jobs, mainly because of factories and some kinds of office work, where people started to think, well, how we're structuring, designing and organizing work, and what effect is this actually having on workers? And the view was, of course, a lot of that effect was not particularly positive. So you got the idea of job enrichment. And it's around this point that when you enrich jobs and make them more kind of productive for people, enjoyable, the idea is this leads to job satisfaction. So in terms of what we think of as now, I guess, as well-being at work, it wasn't really until probably the 40s or even 50s that people started to think around well-being, productivity, performance in that kind of a way. And of course, crucial there, we also got the idea of the happy, productive worker, which has been contested in a very interesting way, I think, ever since then. The 1960s, and probably for 30 years plus after that, we saw the rise and rise and rise of stress. So everything was about stress. Work was horrible, work was terrible, forget satisfaction, work's a horrible, nasty thing, and we need to deal with stress. The Health and Safety Executive in the UK, for example, and many other government agencies around the world started trying to think about how can we protect workers from stress. And I would say around the mid-90s, maybe a bit later, stress seemed to go a little bit out of fashion, in that what seemed to come in then was this whole idea of happiness, positive psychology, engagement, sort of positive stuff. And if you think about that history, it's only about kind of 100 years or so, but you've seen this up and down in focusing on good stuff or focusing on bad stuff. But what's interesting is it's exactly the same reasoning. So good stuff about the workplace makes people feel good, and that makes people perform better. Or bad stuff about work makes people feel bad, and that makes them perform bad. Now, it's exactly the same reasoning. What's interesting about both those parts of reasoning is they're basically wrong, in that there's no nuance in them. So, for example, feeling good is not necessarily good for work performance. So you can feel very positive, very optimistic, very happy. That is terrible for some kinds of work performance. Similarly, you might be feeling a bit anxious or worried or concerned, and that also can be very good for some kinds of work performance. So the general idea that work has to feel good, and it's good to feel good, and that's good for performance, it's in a very generalizable sense vaguely true, and at extremes it's probably true. So people are deeply, for example, unhappy, that probably has a link. Similarly, if people are deeply almost ecstatically excited, that might help some kinds of work performance. But actually there's a lot of nuance that is missed, I guess, in this kind of history of thinking about the links between work and well-being. So I think when we're talking about what's going on now and today and thinking about the future, I think it's really important we bear in mind both that historical context and the way we switched in and out of thinking about positive things about work and negative things about work, because that suggests we need to think about both these things together. And also I think it really questions the sort of models and the sort of simplicity with which we tend to think about this. So a lot more nuance, I think, is needed. So I just now want to talk for 2 minutes about what this, not what that means, but from an evidence-based practice perspective, because that's one of my other interests. What would you do? How do you approach this from an evidence-based practice perspective? And I think Ruth and Angela have already mentioned some of these ideas. I think The first thing is, I think it's incredibly important to define and measure health and well-being in a valid and reliable way. And actually, by defining it, I mean being clear about what you mean by it. So when I've talked to HR people, occupational health people about things like well-being and health, it is all over the place. It ranges from, are people eating a good diet, to do people have clinical depression, to are people doing yoga and thriving and feeling wonderful. All these things are totally different. We should be very, very careful about placing them on a kind of continuum, such that either people are good and happy and everything's great, or they're terrible and awful. All of us are a bit more complicated than that. So there's a mix of things going on around well-being. And if we want to intervene and do something practical, it's pretty important we understand what we actually mean by those terms. And there's an anecdote. I gave a talk to a group of people that are responsible for wellbeing work. It's quite a big conference, about 200 people, and they were all responsible in their jobs for dealing with it. And I asked them to consider and think about what they actually meant by it and how they measured it. And there was a lot of lack of clarity, and I would say little attention paid to what was actually meant, apart from this kind of vague sense. So number one, I think, is trying to define and measure accurately and precisely what it is you're interested in. The second thing I would say is to seek out specific and well-identified problems. It's quite easy to dip into well-being data, health data, and sort of think there are problems and issues going on. There may be, there may not be, but what's often required is a very careful look at those data, and not just the organizational data, but also, for example, to look at some of the other scientific evidence that might be from outside your organization to help with that, as well as things like talking to stakeholders, of course. So I think for me, when I talk and look at what organizations are doing around well-being, there's a huge amount of activity. But if you ask, well, what are you actually trying to achieve with this activity? It's often a bit less clear and a bit less vague. So I think a bit more time spent on diagnosis, as it were, would really help, rather than a lot of emphasis and activity on doing stuff, which isn't necessarily helpful. Finally, I would say the last point, I think one of the interesting things about psychological well-being, physical well-being, all these sorts of things, is we tend to think of it in the workplace, at least, as something we can manipulate and change quite easily. However, it appears to be the case that from what we can tell, is that a lot of the drivers of well-being, there's two things going on. One is personality. So those people bring to the work, as do to everything, as sort of certain kind of personality, which it may be difficult to sort of intervene in and do much about. The second thing that I think is even more important than that is structural things. So, for example, when people talked about well-being during COVID and working from home, some people can't work from home. Some people just haven't got the facilities to work at home. Some people have other issues around being at home. So it's hard to generalize about the effects of these kinds of things. And often it's structural, socioeconomic, things like poverty, lack of money, lack of resources. These are some of the most important drivers of well-being. So for us in HR, that means if we want to intervene in it, that's great, that's fine. But it may be our ability to do it is quite limited because of our ability to control some of those other factors. So I think it's good to think about it, but it's also important to bear in mind there's other things going on that we can't do much about. And that's it.
That's it, he says. That was fantastic, Rob. Thank you so much. A really interesting debunking of some of those generalizations, and I'm sure we'll get some great questions in the Q&A around some of your key points there. So perfect follow on as well from Angela's points and Ruth's as well. So well done. Thank you, Rob. Next speaker is Rory Morgan, who covers the EMEA, Europe, Middle East, Africa. He's a senior EMEA tech channel and marketing manager for a company called Kensington Computer Products Group. So over to you, Rory, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Katie, apologies, that was a bit of a mouthful for you there. I'm just going to share my screen, so I've got a couple of slides to go through today. So Katie, if you let me know if that's all coming through okay.
All good.
Yeah,
thank you, Rory. I'd muted myself.
So hi everybody, as Katie said, I work for a brand called Kensington. I'm sort of I head up the marketing team across the EMEA region. Kensington's a brand that specialises in productivity and well-being computer accessories. And one of the things I want to talk to you about today is kind of work from home equipment and making sure that employees in your organizations have been kitted out effectively make themselves comfortable, productive, and making sure that they're actually getting the work done to the levels that they were back in the office. So looking back towards sort of March when we first went into lockdown, you know, our business shut our head office, as I'm sure most, if not all, of everybody else's did, and we were told to pack up our stuff, take it home, and start working from home. And you know, I was quite fortunate that we were able to take our monitor with us. This has not been the case for lots of people that I've spoken to. So I packed up my backpack, took my laptop and my external monitor, and started setting up for my dining room table. I sat down, you know, had my very unergonomic dining room chair, and within half an hour, I started to get that lower back pain developing. So luckily, you know, our office wasn't closed at the time. So I went back, picked up my chair, and that actually helped a huge amount in terms of my comfort for the rest of the day. But you know, that situation isn't just something that I went through, it's something that kind of the whole world went through when we were forced to move from the office to home. And all of a sudden we were forced to work in spaces that were just not designed for work. And it's had a big impact on the way we work and our comfort and our productivity.
Sorry, Rory, we've lost your video there, Rory. I don't know if you want to just flick that back on.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. I'm having some issues there.
Not essential. Don't worry if not. You carry on. It's absolutely fine. We've got some nice visuals and we can hear you, so don't worry.
For the Q&A. So yeah, one of the first things I wanted to run through really was that posture is really critical to long-term health. As I said, you know, when we started working from home, we were set up in areas that were just not designed for it. So you know, our dining room table, our sofa, our coffee table is not designed to be worked on for 8 hours a day. You know, it's completely the wrong height. Chair isn't supportive enough, and you know, it causes all sorts of issues. So if you can see the image on the left, you know, if you're sat looking at just a laptop, because of the height of the laptop, your back hunches, your neck's completely misaligned, your wrists are at the wrong angle, and it can potentially have, you know, impact on further down your body into the angle of your legs as well. So one of the most critical things that I kind of wanted to talk to is how you should set yourself up in terms of position for working from home. And you know, I'm just going to preface this by saying I'm not a qualified ergonomist, so you know, I'm not qualified to talk about the specific ergonomics and do desk assessments, but there are very simple practices that you can put in place to make sure you're comfortable. And you know, I would always recommend that, you know, remote desk assessments are done with someone who's qualified to you know, make sure that each person has got their bespoke fit for them. You know, one of the first most important things is that the monitor height or the screen height should be at eye level or just below. This means that your neck is more effectively aligned, and it also straightens up the back as well. So you know, there's no hunching involved, as you can see with the picture on the left, as there is. Your wrists should be aligned at the same height as the desk, and your forearms should be sort of parallel to the floor. And this just maintains a nice natural position along your arm to make sure that there's minimizing the risk of any sort of health impact there. And similarly with your legs, they should be at a 90-degree angle to your body, and again parallel with the floor. If you're finding that, you know, your table is too high and therefore your chair is too high, then it may be that you need some support underneath your feet to bring your legs up to that 90-degree angle. And that's one of the most important sort of ergonomic accessories, I think, is a footrest to really align the legs, because it not only aligns your legs, but it aligns your lower back muscles and your spine and everything. So it has a big impact. And then, you know, as we sort of progress through lockdown, people have started investing in a bit more higher level equipment. So, you know, if you've got a standing desk, like I have, it's very important to have a very straight posture, feet flat to the floor. And again, the important thing there is to make sure that your arms are level with the desk and again parallel to the floor. Okay, so you know, one of the things I wanted to develop on was the neck area and the monitor height. So you know, using a laptop without any supporting equipment has real negative short-term comfort impacts, but also long-term health and general wellness impacts. So you know, when you're using a laptop, your posture becomes really unhealthy. This sort of graphic I've got on the screen shows the weight pressure that's added to your neck muscles when the head is leant forward. Because of the angle of the head, your head weighs the equivalent of over 27 kilos. And if you're sat in that position for 8-9 hours a day, as we sometimes are when we're working from home, that's a huge amount of weight that your muscles are having to compensate for. So if you're finding that you've got sore neck and you're asking for a massage at the end of the day, then that'll be why. Your eyes and your neck aren't at the right level. And if you compare this to the graphic on the right, where there's a riser, either a laptop riser or a second screen at the right height, the equivalent weight of the head is just under 5.5 kilos. So there's a massive difference, and it's just a much less strain being put on your muscles and your bones throughout the working day if it's at the right height. Moving on to the next slide. So once the well-being is sorted and everybody's comfortable, there's a big there's a lot to be said about productivity as well. So there's studies out there that have shown that adding an additional screen to your desk setup boosts productivity by up to 42%. And that additional screen can be either 2 monitors, as the lady on the right is using, or even just your laptop has one screen and one monitor as a separate screen. And that boosts sort of productivity for a couple of reasons. One of them is, if you're working on lots of different documents at the same time, you don't have to go hunting for that spreadsheet, or you can have your inbox on one screen and the document that you're working on another screen. And also, if you've got a monitor, then you can have two documents open at the same time on one screen. So, if you're doing some copying and pasting from one document to another, it just means that you can do that task much faster. And then, of course, adding to the productivity benefit is the well-being aspect as well, because if you've got a neck pain, or if you're not feeling comfortable, then obviously you're not going to be working at your most productive as well. So just having that monitor naturally increases the height of your display, which means that you're looking at it at a much better angle. Okay, so to kind of sum that up, as we move into lockdown 2.0 for the UK, the prospect of working from home, it's going to be a longer term thing, at least until halfway through next year. Lots of predictions are saying, but also I think for even longer than that. So I think it's really critical for organizations to look at the equipment they're supplying and their employees working from home, and just to make sure that the very basics are done so they're comfortable. That's critical. And then once they're comfortable, how you get the best out of them, because as I said, home office is not always set up to be a productive workspace, but it can be with some simple steps that are put in place by employers, or even by the employee themselves if they're empowered to do so, by buying the right equipment and making sure their setup is done properly. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand back to Katie.
Thank you very much, Rory. Really fascinating. And I've experienced that, as you say, that neck pain and some of those problems of staring at Zoom. It's very, very intense. And just that ability to turn around and look at another screen and have that flexibility is so important. So that is an important, interesting look at the technology and the accessories that can make such a difference, to our well-being and our productivity in the workplace. I'm going to take us now into another area of technology, but with a different spin altogether, which is the impact of artificial intelligence on business. And so let me share my slides with you as well. I only have a few because I want to really sort of talk around this subject, because in 7 minutes, it's very hard to do justice to one of the hot topics of the moment. So before I talk through this slide, let me just say, I'm 53 and I am continuously putting myself out of my comfort zone and being curious and learning and improving and future-proofing myself, I guess, more than anything else. And when we think about well-being and staff engagement and so on, and positivity, I know that particularly the younger generation really value education and learning. And a lot of my work really is teaching people how to apply technology, how to gain benefits from it. And I think whatever age you are all on a journey of continuous learning. You know, like me, if you've been in business for 30 years, or if you're just graduating, whether your degree is in HR or you don't have a degree, whether you've got a marketing diploma, whatever it might be, we are all having to learn. And one of the key areas at the moment is to understand how technology like artificial intelligence, machine learning, even some of the other blockchain and augmented reality, how they are going to reshape the world of work. And so just quickly, a quick definition. What do we mean by AI? We're really talking about a technology that's been around for 70 years that's now viable because we have data from smartphones and because we have cheap processing power. And it is allowing what you can see on screen now. It is allowing organizations in all different industry sectors to, across different business functions, get big data insights about their marketing, their product development, their HR, and so on. So take BT, for example, in the top line there. They are using AI for service. So in the UK, starts to get cold, November, December, January, and they can look at broadband lines and say, historically, when the weather has been this cold, broadband lines have been down by X%, and we need X number of engineers in the vans to go out and do repairs. So they can look at big data from AI and machine learning, and they can look at weather patterns, predictive analytics, historical data. So that's a simple example. And so what we really mean by AI is the ability of machines and tools to imitate intelligent human behavior. I'll give you another example towards the bottom there. Retail. Go across how a retailer is using AI. 52% is marketing and sales. And so we've got this we've basically got the ability of the AI to help us with big data insights, knowledge of our customers, no longer saying female 40 to 50, but saying Katie comes into our restaurant on a Thursday, she orders ribs, but her teenage kids are vegan. That level of automation becomes really, really important. And so when we think about learning and well-being and so on, what we have to think about is taking away the mystery of these kinds of technologies and preparing the leaders and staff to understand what it really means. And so I have in front of you here my scorecard, which was one of the main parts of my book. The book is a collection of case studies from some of the best brains around the world, academics, major brands, tech disruptors, and mindset is one of the key areas. So having the right mindset, being positive, learning about how these technologies can reshape your job, your company, and so on. Having the buy-in from the board is the second one. Not just jumping into it in a very tactical way, but thinking about the business case, doing a proof of concept and some experimentation as well. And then number 6, thinking about learning and reskilling and education, which I'd say is one of the important ones for well-being, is that people feel listened to. If there are problems, for example, in my book, I feature case studies of a bank which failed to acknowledge the concerns that staff had regarding the future of technology. Their chatbot experiment failed because staff weren't listened to and prepared, and clients found the technology quite gimmicky because it didn't really meet a particular need. And there are many, many other areas as well, ranging from culture. Number 9 is so important because it's about ethics and thinking of all the different stakeholders in the organization and how they're going to benefit, almost that what's in it for me, which when it comes to mental health and positivity and getting everybody on that shared vision is really, really important. This has been mentioned a couple of times on today's webinar. Angela talked a bit about, that why factor, that shared purpose, and that's really important. And I'm very focused on AI for good. I'm part of an all-party parliamentary group task force looking at enterprise adoption. And so with my team and with a number of corporates, all donating our time for free, we had a pilot program where we're teaching the young people in schools, and these are not fee-paying schools and not selective schools, they're comprehensive schools, and we shared with them over 6 sessions with Microsoft, Alan Turing Institute, PwC, Amazon, and so on, how their jobs are going to change. Some were data science students, and we're talking 16, 17-year-olds, and some were students of marketing, finance, and so on. And so I think it's really important that all of us get involved in areas that make us realize, why are we in business? We're not just there to make a profit. We're there to think about, how we can help one another and the difference that we can make in our communities. And that's what I've tried to do with that particular project. And then my final slide is just really getting you thinking about skills. And retraining your staff and building their skills, I think, goes a long way towards helping them future-proof themselves, helping them feel confident in their current jobs, and understanding how tools, whether they are marketing tools that are using machine learning for doing digital marketing in a very different way, whether they are complex problem solving, these are the skills that many of which the AI can't actually achieve. AI doesn't have empathy, it doesn't have consciousness, it isn't truly creative. And so these are the skills from the World Economic Forum that we need to be working on with our employees. We need to invest in their training alongside some of these really important well-being activities that we've been hearing about tomorrow. So I just wanted to give you another slightly different angle on technology and how it can be used very effectively in the workplace. Some of it is about reducing time. And so if your job is enhanced because you're no longer doing what I call the 3 Ds, the dirty, dull, and dangerous, then that's going to help your well-being as well and help you with productivity. So hopefully that's just given you again a few insights into what AI is, how it's potentially going to reshape all of the tasks that we do over the coming years, and the impact that that can have on staff well-being and motivation and so on. So thank you very much for that. So we've now heard from all of our speakers. And so now it's your turn to really, over to you, come on to video if you prefer to use the chat box. We're going to stop recording the webinar now so that we can have a nice, open, honest Chatham House rules type of Q&A. So we've got 46 participants. So actually, I think that's a reasonable number.